Brace yourself because things are about to get weird. We're going to talk about the spiral of time, the karmic cycles that you are helping to close out, and the current state of affairs that are contributing to the collapse of timelines and a fork in the road that we need to be aware of. This will be multiple parts. Grab a snack, get comfortable. I even have some visuals. So let's get started. Before we jump into this conversation, we need to understand time. Now, when we think of time, we think of it in a linear way. And it looks a little something like this. You think of time as a linear construct with the past, the present or the now, and the future. In this regard, you think that things are always moving in one direction, but that is not true. Time is actually moving in a spiral because the only time that exists is the here and now. And instead, we are going in loops over and over and over again to the point where that is touching what we would call the past or the future. My left ear is ringing. Now, here's where things get even more tricky. Because time is actually not linear, it is all folded on top of each other. So, what I am trying to do here with one hand is to match the points. It's not perfect, but that's okay. Progress over perfection. So time is actually like this, all happening on top of each other. And the only point that really exists is this one. You can't see, but my pen just poked through. That is time, this one point that is at the center of the spiral, which on paper is a little hard to conceptualize, but if you think of it as a spiral that goes down to one point in a three-dimensional model, then you can understand that everything is happening in one specific point of time, not in a linear place. Why is that important for you to understand? Because what we continue to experience collectively is the spiral of time, which means that we tend to come back to a similar energy over and over again, a cycle, a loop, in order to choose differently. So if you think of it in your mind, it's almost like you've been on a spiral staircase, and at some point, usually when you return back to a point that you've been before. Individually, that might look like being in another relationship with someone who's exhibiting the same behaviors as a previous relationship, or the same lessons are coming up for you, or being in another job where your body is giving you the same signals as a previous job. You have come back to a loop in time where you're being asked to choose differently, because should you choose differently, then you would prove to yourself and to the universe that you have embodied the knowledge that you have learned through the journey of coming back to this point, so that you are no longer stuck on this feedback loop and you can break free out of this cycle. And so right now, collectively and individually, but collectively on a mass scale, we are experiencing this right now. Some of you know that what is happening in the world right now, specifically in America, is reminding you of a very specific date that you may be old enough to remember back in 2001. The difference is we are coming back to this karmic loop, but we have the opportunity to choose differently. There is a door being presented to us. Will we continue to fall for the same tactics and manipulations that we have been told and taught before, which will keep us in this endless cycle that keeps spiraling around the same energy? Or will we be ready to collapse this timeline and choose differently? Let's go to part two. Welcome to part two of the spiral of time, the karmic cycles you are helping to break, and this big collapse and shift that we are experiencing timeline wise, which we need to be aware of, the fork in the road that is coming up. If you haven't seen part one, please go back and watch that, save this, come back to it. This will be multiple parts. I don't know how many, just get comfortable. Let's continue. We discussed the cycle and the spiral of time. You keep coming back to the same energy, the same experience, might look a little different, might sound a little different, but you are picking up on the patterns, pattern recognition. Whoever I'm talking to, you're really good at that. That's why you're so frustrated, because you're like, why do I, micro, keep coming back to this same loop? Why do we collectively keep coming back to this same loop? Because you are being shown an opportunity to choose differently. And should you choose differently, then things will begin to change. So again, as a quick refresher, if you keep finding yourself in the same relationships with the same partners, in the same lifestyle, in the same job, in the same arguments, should you do things differently, which would require you to ask yourself, what would I normally do in this situation? Would I act out of fear? Would I get defensive? Would I settle? Would I beg? Whatever it is, choose differently. See what happens. You become the variable in whatever constant energetic exchange is happening, which then changes everything. You are the pebble in the stream. You create the ripple effect the second you choose differently because you're stepping out of line. It's no longer an autopilot. Now, let's talk about the collective karmic cycles that we are all breaking. As I mentioned in part one, we are experiencing something within this country that is very reminiscent of something that happened over 20 years ago. Some of us remember, we know what we're talking about. The same narratives, the same tactics, the same tricks that were used before is happening again. And the universe is asking, will you fall for it again? You have come back to that loop. Are you going to choose differently, or are you going to remain the same? Now, this seems difficult because it's asking for a collective response. But what I need you to remember is your choosing differently is enough, because again, it's the ripple effect. So it's not about convincing everyone else. It's about you doing something differently individually. Micro, macro. I always tell you that. Now, obviously, if you are in a position to where you can challenge others' beliefs, where you can have conversations, not attacks, not defenses, because people will refuse to hear you. But if you are put in positions where you can have these conversations and challenge narratives and beliefs that are not being questioned, please do so. But at the end of the day, you choosing differently is enough. Now, if you saw my other series of videos, then you know many of us are timeline jumping. Some of us are quantum leaping and integrating in a way that will create massive change globally. Because of this, old timelines need to collapse. Now, what does that mean for you? That means that in your individual experience, if your timeline is collapsing, certain fears, narratives, people, situations that you have been healing through, lessons and themes. Again, this is where your pattern recognition comes in handy. Lessons and themes, root core wounds, lessons and themes that you have been healing over time, whether that is your safety, your security, your pessimism, your mindset beliefs, your limiting beliefs about yourself, your assumptions, whatever that is for you. You've been healing this for years. And now that the timelines are collapsing, these things will be coming up again for you. You are going to be met with people, situations, circumstances that will ask of you, just like that spiral we talked about in part one. Are you ready to let this go? What is your body doing? Can you remain regulated despite the chaos? Not because you're dissociating and ignoring, but because there is something bigger than you that is telling you everything is going to be okay. This looks different for everybody. But because timelines are collapsing, anything that needs to be released is going to come up for you at this time. So if that's true for you right now, it's not about, oh my gosh, how am I here again? Why is this happening? What did I do wrong? You didn't do anything wrong. This is your opportunity, 1221 on the time. You may be seeing, I believe it's called palindrome numbers. It's like mirrored or reflective. You get it. This is a sign. There is, again, a collapse. Now look, in part one, I told you the point in the middle is time because it's happening on top of each other. The collapse, when all the attention is in between, boom, it folds, it collapses right in the middle, which means there is a reflection, a reflective experience happening energetically. We'll save that for another video. But right now, what I need you to do, what are the patterns that are coming up for my individual healing journey right now? What am I ready to face and release? Where am I ready to embody the integrated knowledge that I have acquired up until this point? Don't revert back. It's okay if you have your moments, we all do, but you know better now. They've shown you. So it's time to implement, embody, put it into practice. And it's important for you individually because it affects the collective. So let's go to part 3. Welcome to part 3 of the spiral of time, the karmic cycles that you are helping break collectively, and this massive timeline collapse that is going to reach a fork in the road, and you need to know about it. If this is the first video you're seeing, please save this, go watch part 1 and part 2, and come back to this. Let's just dive in because there's still a lot to go over. As I mentioned in part 2, your individual healing journey is being, for lack of a better term, tested at this time because of the timeline collapse, which means common themes around lessons, assumptions, wounds, limiting beliefs, interpretations, your perception of the world and of yourself is being tested at this time because of this collapse. This is just to show you where you're still carrying fear or where there is still wounding that requires your healed response because you've been doing the work and you can do this. Now, why is all of this important? Again, micro, macro together, intertwined, reflective. Micro being your personal experience, macro being the collective representation of this. Even now, you're seeing it. For whoever I'm talking to, your healing journey felt like you were strapped into some sort of rocket ship, and it was this. Like, just buckle up and get ready for the ride because it was back to back to back to back. You, even in this moment, are like, how did I survive that? How am I still here? You got whiplash from all of the healing you had to do. It was like you were getting hit spiritually from every corner. Everything was coming at you at once. Look at what's happening in the world. For years, it's like we couldn't take a breath without another crisis or catastrophe happening. It's the same thing. Your individual healing journey, where you felt like you were just getting hit nonstop, we are seeing it collectively as well. This is the spiral of time, again, giving the collective an opportunity to choose differently. The only way the collective can choose differently is when each individual is choosing differently for themselves, because you are breaking the limitations of the experience that you have allowed for yourself. And when you break the limitations, which means breaking the illusions, collapsing the illusions that have allowed you to be fenced in and only see this far or only believe this is what's possible because that's what's always been, you now know that's not true. So when people say history repeats itself, they're not wrong. The spiral of time shows us history will repeat itself, but you can always choose differently. However, if you have already, even unconsciously, made yourself believe this is all that's possible, just like we talk about your individual journey, if we believe this is all that's possible, then that is what will be. We can't even entertain truthfully, honestly, and truly another option because we don't even believe that exists. So until you are able to perceive something, it doesn't exist. The same way for you in your individual journey, and now we're seeing it collectively. What has always been done, which is why history keeps repeating itself, is not working. So now we have a choice. Do we continue to do what we've always done because we believe that is our only option? Or are we willing to go down the path that is unknown and uncertain, and that feels frightening because we cannot see 10 steps ahead? Same as your individual journey. I've told you this. The reason you stay in those relationships is because they're predictable. That predictability gives you a sense of safety and control. And because you know how it will end, you choose it because you know how to show up, even if it's showing up in a way that breaks your heart. In the same way that in this world collectively, we continue to choose predictability, the lesser of the two evils, because we know what will happen. We have an idea, we've been here before, and that predictability gives us a sense of control and safety that is an illusion, instead of doing the scary thing, which is creating something completely different. because of the unknown and the uncertainty. Now, because of this, we also have collective karmic cycles that we are all playing a role in breaking. And when we talk about epigenetic and generational cycles, breaking generational curses, that is all the same thing. It is energy that has not been transmuted, and so it keeps getting passed down to the next generation, whether it's through family, through society, or otherwise. And so a lot of us now are carrying the weight of a lot of generations before us who were not able to transmute and break out of certain karmic cycles that we are now breaking out of. And in order for that to happen, we have to be met with that energy in order to recognize it, observe it, transmute it, neutralize it, which means taking that energy and turning it into something different, because energy is neither created nor destroyed. It just transforms. That is why you're the alchemist. That is why you're the magician. Because when energy comes to you, you have a choice of what to do with it. You can either create the same thing or something different. So let's talk about each cycle's main theme and how we are transmuting it. Let's go to part 4. Welcome to part 4 of the spiral of time, the karmic cycles you are helping break, and the massive timeline collapse that we are experiencing with a fork in the road in the future. If this is the first video you're seeing, please catch up because we are talking about a lot of stuff and I don't have the time to catch you up. So save this, come back to it once you're ready. Now let's dive in. As I mentioned in the last part, there are numerous karmic cycles that have been passed down to generation when the energy is not transmuted and created differently. A lot of us, you who's seeing this video, myself and others, have been working towards transmuting a lot of energy, epigenetic trauma, generational curses, cycles, personally and therefore collectively, because it's all connected, so that we don't have to pass this on and keep it alive. Now, as an astrologer, I know astrology helps us identify what that energy looks like. And the sign that I was told to look at for this specific channel is Pluto. Yes, I have notes, so let's get into it. Now, when we talk about Pluto, Pluto is a generational placement. Those of us who have Pluto in a specific sign, you're one of many other people who are born in a huge gap of years, usually around 2 decades, who have that same sign. What does that tell you? That tells you that generationally, there is an energy that is being asked to be transmuted, transformed, a death and rebirth around this energy through your generation. Pluto is the planet of that transformation, of the shadows, of power and control. So if we look at the Pluto placement, you will see how over time there have been themes that, when not transmuted, shapeshift into yet another power dynamic or control tactic that needs to be transmuted and changed over time. For whatever reason, when I was channeling this, they started with Pluto in Leo. So that's where we're going to start. If we just go down the list, Pluto in Leo, that generation, again, we're talking about the shadow of these elements. For Pluto in Leo, that was a generation that was embodying, in order to transmute, the energy of narcissism and ego. There was a heightened level of ego and narcissism with those with Pluto in Leo, not because they were meant to hold that shadow element, they were meant to transmute and transform that energy. However, those who are not able to do that then pass it on to the next generation, which would be the Pluto in Virgo generation. Those with Pluto in Virgo then create the energy of hypercriticism and perfectionism because of that egocentric, narcissistic energy holding them and imprisoning them. And so, in order to placate that, in order to maneuver through having to hold this narcissistic energy, you then become a perfectionist, because again, this is now low self-worth. And so in order to be able to live through these feelings of low self-worth, you think, well, if I'm perfect, then I'm enough. So now you create perfectionism. Does that actually work? No. Again, this is the shadow. This is the repressed energy that allows you to believe, oh, if I am just this way, then everything will be okay, instead of acknowledging that is not the truth. And instead, we need to acknowledge, validate, and transmute this energy. So now we have a generation of hypercriticism and perfectionism. And then we move on to Pluto in Libra. This creates the codependency and self-sacrifice, a lack of balance in the shadow. Why? Because when someone is hypercritical or seeking perfectionism, you, in order to gain that love, that approval, that ability to navigate this energy, you create codependency. If you are okay, then I am okay, which is then self-abandonment. Are you seeing how every energy that is not transmuted feeds into the next generation and shapeshifts into yet another core wound, another shadow that needs to be transmuted? So now that Libra is focused on this codependency and self-sacrifice, we have the Pluto and Scorpio generation, which comes in with distrust, with manipulation, with betrayal. A lot of times this manipulation is emotional manipulation because you don't want codependency. You can feel in your body, this isn't healthy, this isn't what I want. But because you may not be able to voice that, because you may not be able to understand how to get your needs met because you were never taught, because this is cyclical, you resort to emotional manipulation, which you may not even identify because so much of this is unconscious. You don't even identify that you're participating in emotional manipulation in order to get your needs met. You just think that you are doing what is necessary in order to deal with people you cannot have a healthy conversation with. And the betrayal, more often than not, although it does happen with others, is self-betrayal, which is again another form of that cycle transmuting into something that is deeper in the shadow instead of something healthier. And the distrust comes from knowing that I can't trust you to be honest with me because you're not honest with yourself, because I learned I have to sacrifice myself. And so now I can't even trust myself. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the time. Now, the other thing with Pluto and Scorpio is we are the transmuters. We are very big on death and rebirth. Our generation is creating a lot of healing. That's why we're also really big with the psychic awareness. So many of us are waking up to these gifts in order to help us transmute this energy. However, should this energy not be transmuted, and again, on a grand scale, it's going to keep going, but hopefully in smaller and smaller percentages, we then have Pluto and Sagittarius. Now, this is a generation that can have self-righteousness. This is also restless and non-committal. So again, where we come from Scorpio, which is a deeply devotional sign, but because of the shadow elements, has created manipulation, distrust, paranoia, betrayal. We then swing to, well, let's not commit to anyone, including ourselves. But that's the unconscious part. You're non-committal to anything, you become restless. And so when you are this restless, you try to find that stimulus, that desire through self-righteousness, through, again, feeling important enough to have something worth living for. Not to be dramatic, but that's what's coming through. Now, again, as this cycle continues, you have Pluto and Capricorn, which we just came out of. This is heavy on greed and materialism. Because now I am so disembodied within myself through all of these cycles of shadows that have been passed down because they have not been healed, I am now looking for external means, money, stuff, status, authority, to make me feel worthy. That is the shadow, that materialism, that greed. And again, we're seeing it on a collective scale because this isn't just pertaining to people. This can also be for nations, for countries, for governments, for organizations. Now, with Pluto in Aquarius, the shadow of this is a God complex. Why do you think God is becoming such a hot topic during this transit? We are going to be facing a fork in the road based on whether or not we are willing to transmute and change these karmic cycles. We've already been doing the work for so many of these because they are all connected, and you're seeing how they each feed into each other. So let's talk about Pluto and Aquarius, the potential for Pluto and Pisces, and the American dream in part 5. Welcome to part 5 of the spiral of time, the karmic cycles that you are helping to break, and the massive timeline collapse and cycles that we are closing out. But the fork in the road that's coming up that you need to know about, this is the final part of this series. So if you made it here, thank you. If this is the first video you're seeing, please save this, come back to it, because there's a lot you need to catch up on before you get here. So let's just dive into where we left off. When it comes to Pluto in Aquarius, we are seeing the shadow of the God complex come up. That's also why you are noticing the false worship, the false light being a topic of conversation, the questioning of, is the God that we have been taught the true God, or have we been bamboozled? Is there something coming up here where we are being told false truths around the prophecy of God, around the education around God? Now, the other thing with this is, as we mentioned in other parts, the cycle that keeps feeding into the next Pluto cycle of the shadow that needs to be transmuted individually and therefore collectively. You are noticing a theme of self, the disembodiment of self, and how the disembodiment of self keeps leading to a lack of gratification and seeking things externally, especially with Pluto and Capricorn, in order to fill that void. Now, if you've been paying attention, or perhaps you've even experienced this personally, external materialism will never fill that void of this energy. You've seen it with celebrities, you've seen it with people who have a lot of wealth, who have access, who have status. There are many of them who are still seeking something that they can never buy because it is something internal. Now, with Pluto in Aquarius, it gets to the point where, well, if I just believe I am God, to the point where I make and act as though I am God over other people, if I believe I am more important than others, that I am God, this sort of false, again, that false light, false prophet energy, because you are seeking stimulus, you are seeking something to convince you that it's still worth being here, because you haven't been able to truly commune with God internally, because communing with God means communing with yourself, not in I am better than you hierarchy God, but I am one with God, and God is in everyone, and I recognize God in everything and in everyone, and that is why I treat everyone and everything with respect. Now, because we are in this generation, the Pluto and Aquarius generation, we are seeing this energy swirling up to the surface. We are seeing these conversations happening. The next Pluto in Pisces generation, my prediction, there is a fork in the road that happens depending on which way we go here. The shadow would be delusion, straight delusion, which was shown to me as virtual reality transhumanism. It is what you were seeing in those Black Mirror episodes. It is completely now neglecting the body, neglecting the present moment, neglecting this experience in order to now colonize and live through an artificial reality where you will no longer be alive. You will project your consciousness through a game, essentially, and no longer be here now. That would be the dark place. That would be the sign that, oh, we went the wrong way. Should we transmute and choose differently? Then we experience unity and interconnectedness. That is the light of the Piscean age. That is where power is shared. Control is not over another person. It is in the recognition, I don't think that's a word, that it is in recognizing that the only thing you have control over is yourself. Ooh, confirmation burp. And instead of controlling others, understanding where they may need help, what resources we can come together to share with the world. What does peace actually look like? Have we ever even bothered to try? Or has it always been us versus you? Continuous conquering, colonization, seeing others as less than in order to manipulate your mind to doing the most horrendous things so that you will be safe, when really what's going on is you want to extract and destabilize for your own personal gain. There are historians who are way more qualified to go into that, but you know what I'm talking about. Again, it is seeing through the narcissism and ego of the individual and therefore the collective, the hypercriticism and perfectionism, the codependency and self sacrifice, the distrust, manipulation, and betrayal, the self righteousness, restlessness, and non committal energy, the power dynamics, greed, and materialism, the God complex and false light. And then in the future, hopefully, we choose the path not always chosen, something different, but if not, the delusion that results in no longer even being here. This is what I'm seeing. Now, the last point I'm going to make for this series is the American dream, which many of us were told was, the house with the white picket fence, the spouse, the children, the pets, whatever. The American dream is just that. It's a dream, it's an illusion. You were brought here, and I'm talking to immigrants specifically, but even then, we are all immigrants to this land because no one was here other than the indigenous tribes who were here first. The dream is what you are meant to break out of. It's an illusion. But you are not here for superficial reasons. That hope that your families may have used as the reason for leaving their home country to come here is valid, but that hope wasn't in material gain and opportunity. It was breaking out of the illusions that you would not have even realized you were still embodying, carrying throughout your lineage, because if you stayed where you were, you would be surrounded by the same thought process, the same beliefs, the same education, the same teachings, maybe. But then you come here and you are immediately exposed to different people, different cultures, different beliefs. You are challenged, sometimes uncomfortably. You are put in an environment with so many varying variables, so much change, so much differences, that it allowed you to break out of any conditioning that you needed to break out of in order to heal yourself, heal your lineage, heal your bloodline. And you take that medicine back with you. But like I said in the other series, where you are the new earth, you are what happens when two worlds collide. You being able to see through the illusion, to break out of the dream, to see the truth is the medicine that is helping not just yourself, not just your family, but the world. That is the ripple effect. Don't be afraid to choose differently. Don't be afraid to choose the path that is uncertain and unknown. Ask yourself, what do I know taking the path I've always taken? Am I ready to choose something differently? Are we collectively ready to choose something differently for ourselves, for our families, for the future generations, and for our people? Judging by all the work that we have done up until this point, we were preparing to answer that very question. And I think you know what that is.